Hello, everyone. I am excited to be with you. I will give everyone just one more moment. I'm expecting a few more participants than are here presently. So we'll give them about a minute or two before we get started this morning. All right, let's get started because as an educator, I'm an over planner, so I have so much. I don't know how many of you can relate to that, but I I usually tend to be the teacher who's like, wait, I just have one more thing to tell you. So let's get started so that I don't run over as I typically tend to do. Welcome to this session on tackling anti-racism with visual literacy. I am Keisha Rembert. I am an assistant professor of teacher prep at National Louis University, which is in Chicago, Illinois. So I am from the Windy City, right in the middle of the United States. And it is beautiful fall-like temperatures here. So I'm a happy camper today with the sun shining, which is atypical for a November morning. I want to introduce myself first by saying hello to everyone, and I'm so excited that this is an international conference. Although we don't have a lot of international participants this session, I've practiced my Arabic, so I'm going to practice it out for my next session. Mohaba, which is also hello. And I'm just going to introduce myself. It wouldn't be a session about visual literacy without introducing myself through the form of visuals. And what better visuals than images of my students? So I was a middle school educator for 15 plus years. If I told you the exact amount, um, I'd have to kill you. But I taught 8th grade history and language arts for a number of years. And the images that you see on the left-hand side, the the upper part of the screen are my last batch of 8th grade students. They kept me young, they kept me on my toes, and I understood that as I was teaching middle schoolers, that they were experiencing a time of tremendous growth and that they were also developing this great sense of self and their own place in the world. They were
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but all it says for me is that you've started sharing your screen and I can't see anything.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I'm so sorry.
Hold on. Let me stop share here. Thank you for telling me that. Is anyone else experiencing that issue?
No, actually, I think it also may be on your end, Taylor. So you might want to change your screen. So if you look in the upper, I believe, right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see different ways to change your view because I can see what you're presenting, Keisha.
Okay.
Same here. I can see it.
Okay, hold on, let me get back to, Taylor, let me know if it's still an issue once I kind of reconcile. So Taylor, I'm sharing again. Have you reconciled it on your end?
Yes, I didn't do anything differently. When I joined the meeting, you were sharing your screen and I couldn't see it then. So I think you just needed to reshare for some reason. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for rectifying. Please continue, it's great.
No problem. All right, so I've got these 8th graders, right? We've got these middle schoolers who are questioning themselves and questioning others. And I love that about them. I really did. I love that they were grappling with things like race and racism, while also recognizing too that I'm dealing with a generation that is completely different than my own, that they were digital natives for whom screens were more familiar than newspapers that I grew up with and magazines. I have a goddaughter who had a magazine in my lap, and she started tapping it like an iPad. And it really illustrated for me, first of all, how old I was, but also that this generation explores the world much differently than I have in the past. And so I had to use their desire to question and also their comfort with visual imagery to promote learning. And the images on the bottom of the screen are my college students that I currently teach. So these students are not adolescents, but they're still questioning themselves and they're still questioning their place in the field of education and how to reach students during a turbulent time in the world. So these are my students. If you wouldn't mind just using the chat to tell me a little bit about your students. And I thank you in advance for just sharing a little bit about the students that you teach. Don't be a shy group. Right, and even actually, we're such a small group, if you want to unmute yourselves, you can. So thank you, Kim, that your students are graduate and undergrad candidates in early childhood and education, as are mine. Pre-service teachers, grad students, literacy specialists, awesome. Thank you for sharing about your own students, because they're why we're here, right? So they are the reason that we're here this morning. I just want to give you some guidelines for participation. We're going to use the chat to engage, and we're such a small group that if you want to unmute yourself, by all means, please do. As you know, this conference is one that's based on co-creation. And when we're in that space, it's important that we create a safe learning environment that is respectful and open. My mother used to always tell me that listening is essential to learning. And so as we co-create, let's not forget to listen to one another to ensure that safety and that learning focused environment. There'll be opportunities again for you to unmute yourselves. And because this is such a small group, I hope that we can do that really frequently to participate, but please mute yourselves before we, right now. So we're starting with another visual to start, and I'm gonna give you a minute to take time to read this image, and then just ask you, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder about the image that is on your screen? So if you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourselves and thinking about that image that's on the screen, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder about the image that is there currently?
What's jumping out to me visually and from a design standpoint is that it's in black and white. And then my eyes are drawn to the balance and obviously the skulls and what looks like it could be flames, but I can't tell because there's no color in it.
Okay. That's a really good reading of it. Does anyone notice anything different or wonder anything about this image particularly?
Building with Katie, I also noticed like the scales, and I noticed how the seemingly balanced scale contrasts the words that are there on that image. So I was sort of wondering about the person, like the design structure, and like, was that intentional and all of those things.
Okay, so this lack of justice, and yet there are these scales that seem to be balanced to indicate that there is some sort of justice. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm wondering, Katie mentioned flames, and I can't help but wonder what's wrapped around the center. Is it flames, or is it smoke, or is it a snake? I'm just wondering what I'm squinting away at the image, just, what's wrapped around the scales.
I can relate to you in the squinting, and even as my older eyes, I was looking at it and thinking, is it a snake? That came to mind, and
Right.
what's holding it up? I saw in the screen too, but are those just flames? And I'm also, is the smoke that surrounds it? There's so much there to dissect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use this image just as the groundwork to start talking about really concrete definitions of terms. The first term that we are going to define is racism and anti-racism. And so racism is a lot of times we, in these words, and I seek to define these because these words have become really familiar to our lexicon as of late. And not that they haven't always been within our purview, but as of late, they have really just taken root in our dialogues. So I want to make sure that we flush them out so that we have a common understanding and language surrounding them as we move forward. So racism is not only about individuals and their actions. Racism as a system. So for the purpose of our dialogue today, racism is not about kindness. It's not about individual actions. Racism is a system. It's a system of oppression that is based in and upholds white superiority and the inferiority, therefore, of Black, Indigenous people of color. Racism is created by and upheld through policies, practices, and procedures to create inequities between racial groups. And so if we think about racism in those terms in the same way, then anti-racism is also a system. It is a system in which policies, practices, and procedures are created to promote racial equity. And anti-racism actively works to uplift the innate humanity and individuality of Black, Indigenous people of color. And in that way, the practice of anti-racism is everyone's ongoing work. I like to say that anti-racism is a verb, and it is not a state of being. So, and if I think of the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi, he affirms this idea by stating, racist or anti-racist is what we do, not who we are. So that is kind of the basis and the frame in which we're thinking, in which I've laid out this work in terms of our definition of anti-racist. And so now let's think about this in terms of anti-racism and pedagogy. So I have another image on the screen, and I'm going to ask you, is there a relationship between the image and the text? And if you can identify a relationship, what is that relationship? And if not, what is missing from this image or the text that would help you to create a connection or to determine a relationship? And again, small groups, so if you want to unmute yourselves after giving yourself a little bit of time to analyze, please do.
So you asked the question, what's the relationship between the text and the image?
Yes.
And it looks like planting seeds, and that seems to connect to anti-racism as an action, as you just pointed out.
Okay. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anyone else see metaphors, ideas within this image that might facilitate some connection?
Well, anti-racism is not a one and done action. Like you said, it's not, and it's not a description, it's life work. And so what I'm thinking about is that, you know, you see the fists up, and that means that growth is happening, but not everyone's like, you would think that the bodies would be all the way out. So it makes me think that it's just the very beginning, and that there's much more to go in order for everybody to be bodily out and represented and as full people.
I love that. I love that, Katie. That is what I was thinking of too. Why just the hands? Why do we only see a portion of the hands that are coming out from the ground? Anything else that you all are able to connect to the image and this idea of anti-racist pedagogy?
I also can't help but notice that it was probably purposefully drawn or painted on a wall. And so my connection would be that anti-racist pedagogy would help break through the barrier or the wall. And very much like Katie said, it's ongoing, and they're not all the way out yet, but the process has been started. And that's part of it's circling back around, is that it won't ever be finished because it is ongoing, but it's a start.
Absolutely. I'm drawn also, and I don't know about you all, to the mask around his mouth. And I equate that with this, with teachers being afraid sometimes to talk about this work, to engage in this work. And so that's where my mind went when I saw the image. I don't know if anyone can see that connection as well, but that's where my mind went immediately as I saw the image.
Keisha, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I couldn't help but think of our current times of COVID. So yeah, it's so important, it feels like, to talk about these images together, because I was just thinking maybe it was drawn recently, and so there's a mask on a person who's being responsible by wearing a mask. So, but I love what you're saying, because that feels exactly like how I feel sometimes about talking about anti-racism in teacher education.
Absolutely. It's so weird. See, in my mind, didn't even go to the mask thing with what we've normalized, right? And this short amount of time, what is short, but it's also long, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we're able to come at it from those different perspectives. And it would be interesting to me to see what students pull out of this. And also to just think that this is a piece from Tunisia. And so what other text or what other conversations is this around? You know, we framed it around one context. What are other contexts in which this image is itself framed? I think it's also an interesting conversation for people. I agree. When they don't, it's not respectful if you don't put it over your nose. Wholeheartedly agree with that, Nancy. So thinking about this question, what are your thoughts about how anti-racist ideals impact teaching and learning? Oops, yikes, sorry. Can anyone speak to that? How anti-racist ideals impact teaching and learning?
So while I walked the dogs this morning, I found a new podcast for me, Teaching While White. Other people may have known it, but I just found it earlier this week. So, and I was listening to the No Neutral Zone conversation. And so I've been thinking a lot about when we share our story with students, and then also Anti-racist ideals impact teaching and learning because we need to change how we approach our students, but also how we approach the systems within which we work, and when and where. And we have to provide, for me, especially our pre-service teachers, with the tools to address those systems and the ways in which that they can address those systems. And we also have to remember that nothing is neutral, that there is bias in everything. And I think if, at the very least, with our pre-service teachers, if we can get them to recognize there is bias in every system, and that is a place to start. So that's what, I have a lot of thoughts racing through my head, but that's from this morning's dog walk, and this image that is right now.
I find my students who are from marginalized communities themselves have a hard time even recognizing the systems. And I find that extremely interesting. I think that they've been a part of it so long that they don't see it separate. It's hard for them to see it separately. So I think that's also one of the charges of anti-racist teaching and learning, to make those systems visible to those people who it is so ingrained in who they are that they have a hard time recognizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
So for me, like anti-racist ideas that impact the classroom is that realizing the materials and our walls around us are racist. Is that by being aware of that, we can critically look at the material we do have to make it more empowering to the students, to make it more so that they feel welcome and safe in our space. Like Jack and Annie from Magic Tree House is a great story, and they go on great adventures, but it's still just one white boy and one white girl. It's not going to appeal to every student in our class. Is that by looking critically at our library, looking critically at our posters in our room, we can turn those things that appear to a white teacher as just literature to, oh my gosh, that is racist and biased to my students.
Absolutely.
So, just that awareness of knowing that to some degree I am biased and to some degree I am racist, and to counteract that to make it, I guess, again, a safe and welcoming environment for all students in all backgrounds.
I love that you use that word power, because I think that is at the heart of anti-racist teaching, and that power, I think, exists not only in just what we give students, but we need to ourselves release the power of learning to our students. So is it power, or is it power held, or is it power unleashed? So in a number of writings that I've done, this is how I've defined anti-racism, anti-racist pedagogy, as actively engaging students in discourse and texts that challenge, resist racist ideas, thoughts, and narratives, while establishing modes of acknowledging, affirming, and elevating those traditionally marginalized. It empowers, going back to the word that we just used, students to delve into why racism exists and how to counteract it. And so I paired my definition with this image because of those highlighted words specifically. So anti-racism is about power, and it includes releasing that power of learning to our students. And I believe that visual literacy helps us to get there and to do that. UNESCO defines literacy as reading the world. And it says that it is a means of developing the capacity for social awareness and critical reflection as a basis for personal and social change. And so visual literacy really gives students this important skill set. But I'm just really going to highlight two that I believe are specific to middle grade students. And that is constructing meaning, or being able to use a visual to construct meaning based on the evidence that's provided, and critical thinking. So viewing something through a critical lens is also important. And I think those are at the basis for good visual literacy, especially in the middle grades. So how is the image on the screen a metaphor for anti-racist pedagogy? Or I might ask it a different way, since I've asked that question, could you write a metaphor that connects this image to anti-racist pedagogy? Anyone want to take a shot at that?
Well, my first impression was that there are words written all over this person's body. And I think the metaphor drawn is that these words or these phrases are powerful and, well, empowering and uplifting and promoting equity, whereas the words that have typically been written on this person might be a very different picture. So I think the connection here is just repainting the words that we use, or, you know, like invoking these empowering phrases to uproot and change the system.
Great, Taylor, thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think my microphone might have gone out, but I think my computer one is working. To build off of what Taylor was saying, it shows that language constitutes our world. And so it constitutes our being, our existence, our relationships with one another, and our relationship to power. So I think that, you know, in showing that the words are making up the person, could be a metaphor for how language constitutes who we are and with each other and the world.
Anyone else?
So I'm looking at this thinking that we need to think of the positioning of this person and who positioned those words, who wrote those words. Are those the words that they wrote? And I'm just thinking about, if I was using this in a middle grades classroom, what questions would I really want my students to ask of the image? So, or even in our college classrooms, because, you know, who's the author of the words, why those words, you know, and yeah, I'm also noticing the little flowers on the lapel, and that just seems, it looks like an image out of a 1950s shirt. Although I don't know fashion, so I am sitting here going like, okay, where is this coming from? I'm asking a lot more questions that maybe I'm not jumping or able to get right into that metaphor.
I love the fact that you can't see the face. I love that the hand covers the face, that it doesn't matter what I look like, that we should all be thinking about these words. And I think that is the heart of anti-racist pedagogy. I taught in a suburban Chicago district where I had students who didn't look like me, who weren't marginalized, and I still had to engage in anti-racist pedagogy. I still had to instill in them that we're all human beings. So it doesn't matter what my students look like, it doesn't matter where my students come from, all of us need, no matter what we look like, we all need to recognize that we are all humans. So visual literacy allows us to get to this place of depth, especially in this online space, while giving students the ability to gain multiple entry points for literacy development. So we're doing some inferencing, we're doing some inquiry, we are doing some critical analysis, we are evaluating. And this transcends students' backgrounds, and it really highlights their interests and their learning styles. And couple this with technology and in this online space, I believe these visuals become less intimidating for students, and we're able to utilize them in novel ways and make literacy more accessible to students. And so this becomes a perfect vehicle to tackle anti-racist ideals. I'm going to delve into some frameworks for anti-racist pedagogy, and I'm really going to use two. The first is from Dr. Barbara Love. It is her liberatory consciousness framework. And it is outlined here as these 4 different steps that are coupled with some basic questions. So the first one is awareness. What do you notice? And I've kind of changed these to make these applicable to visual literacy. So awareness, what do you notice? So as we give students a text, if we're wanting to delve deeper into anti-racist pedagogy, we ask them first what they notice, empowering for them also. Analysis, describe what you see and what it means. Identify any power dynamics in this image. Of course, there's going to be some pre-work that we would have to do as educators to define terms for students and make sure that they're comfortable before we start utilizing these frameworks. And then action, what action does this promote? What inaction? What would inaction mean in this image? And then this last one of accountability and allyship. Are there opportunities to raise awareness on an issue or advocate for a solution? So that's one anti-racist framework. And then I'm going to go through now another one before we really start practicing and using this with a visual literacy text set that I've created. The next anti-racist pedagogy framework is from Goldie Muhammad, who is the author of Cultivating Genius, one of my new favorites. This framework is called her Historically Responsive Literacy Framework. And it really does help students, if I talked about a little while ago, constructing meaning and critical thinking were really important for middle grade students to challenge this idea of power and privilege. And I really think that this framework does a really good job in that. Again, here, there's some terminology that you would have to pre-teach for students so that they totally understood them. But I think that this is a great framework. I'm glad to see that some people are already, that her work is catching fire. And then, so her framework is identity, making connections to self and others. So looking at an image and how does this connect to who I am and how might this connect to others? Then focusing on that skill, that critical analysis skills, to asking students to interpret, evaluate, assess, analyze, and then getting into some more intellectual ideology. So how can they gain knowledge through learning and really thinking deeply? Is that through a background investigation? Is that through historical knowledge? Is that through research? What does that look like? And then that criticality, is to develop the ability to read text to understand power, authority, and privilege, thinking about that why and that impact. And the last one, which is probably my favorite one that often we don't get to enough, is the joy, which means including celebrations of accomplishments of marginalized groups with joy. I love these as a frame for giving students the structure and some of the language to tackle anti-racist work through visual imagery. So here I have a visual literacy text set that I'm going to share with you. I'm sorry, my computer, oh my goodness gracious. Hold on, you guys. I'm gonna stop share. I just did something really weird. This is like a real live classroom. This happens to me so often in class, or I'm talking for 10 minutes and they're like, we don't hear you. You've been on mute. And they wait for a long time to tell me that, which I'm like, great, thanks.
Come hang out with my 3rd graders. They'll tell you instantly.
Oh, you know, they are the truth tellers. My 8th graders would look at me like I had 3 heads and like, well, we'll see how long it takes for her to find out.
Keisha, where in Chicago do you teach?
I teach at National Louis University.
Right, but you're 8th graders.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I taught in suburban Chicago.
Okay, I was in Mount Prospect and
okay.
Lake Forest when I was in Chicago. I went to Circle campus many.
Oh my goodness, yes. I have gone, if I'm being totally
We can
honest.
talk later, but I was just wondering, yeah.
No, I went to HF, if you know where HF is.
Yes, my nephews go to HF.
Yes, yeah, that's my community for sure.
Yes, my nephews are there right now. Okay, you probably see a lot of stuff on the screen right now. Let's hopefully this works. Okay, so this is, let's put those anti-racist frameworks in practice with a visual literacy text set. So we're gonna start with this image. Are you all seeing the image? I just wanna make sure. Oh, can't see anyone.
Yes, I can
Okay.
see it.
Thank you. I'm just,
Sorry, yes, I can.
great. So we're gonna start with this visual literacy text set. And we're gonna start with this image from a statue found in Copenhagen Harbor that dates back to 2006. And we're gonna use the literary consciousness framework to interrogate this text and all of these texts within this set. And as a reminder, there are 4 parts. There's the awareness, there's the analysis, there's the action, and then there's the accountability allyship. So I'm gonna first start with just that awareness and ask you, what do you notice?
The weaker, well, what looks like the weaker person is carrying the larger person. The physicality differences between the two.
Okay.
I'm noticing that they're standing in water, and water can change height. So I wonder if that would ever come into play on how this image is interpreted. And I'm also noticing, again, the balance. And I know that's not necessarily a part of the initial text set, but now I'm seeing a theme of this like balance that was in that first image too. So it's coming back. And I can't tell what the person who is being held up is holding in their hand. I'm not sure what that is, but.
The scale, so it goes back to your balance point.
In the other hand though,
Oh,
it looks like just a stick from my perspective,
Yeah,
but I can't tell. All right.
I was also
Oh, wow.
gracious.
with the scale just about justice and who determines what's fair, because they seem to be the one who holds justice in their hands.
Awesome, thank you for that. Anyone else? Thinking about power and just the power dynamic here. Can anybody describe what you think that the power dynamic that exists in this image?
Well, I was instantly drawn to like the person's size. And I know that historically, food and wealth often translated into like just being a larger size because you had a surplus. So my brain was already thinking like the person on top must be powerful or influential of some sort beyond the fact that he's on the person's shoulders, but just because of his sheer size that he has access to money and then resources and stuff like that.
All right. So I'm gonna add another image into the mix. And you guys, this is actually what is found on the inscription of this work. So I'll give you a moment to read it to yourself. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm having so many issues with things popping up on me. I hope you guys can still see the screen. Is everyone still okay seeing the screen?
I can.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So this is, although I've lost my notes, I think. So the survival of the fattest is the name of this image. And the inscription is, I'm sitting on the back of a man. He is sinking under the burden. I would do anything to help him except stepping down from his back. Thinking about that, what does that tell you about power and privilege?
That those with privilege, it's easy to say that you would help, but not actually take the action to do so. And is the person on top naked while the person below is wearing clothing?
Yes.
So two, that goes towards like maybe laws and rules, like you have to be clothed to go in a store while the person in power says those rules don't apply to me.
Okay, really good analysis. Anyone else want to respond in any way based on that? I'm sorry, I'm finding my notes. So if the screen is moving, you guys, it's because I'm trying to find where my notes are.
I was thinking, you know, with the description a lot about the white savior kind of, yeah, we're going to help you, but really we're not helping you. We're just setting up systems that are our systems and trying to make you connect to our systems.
Really nice. Okay. So thinking about how you might use this in a classroom, is there a place for this? And especially, and I know that, so I look at the image and I do see that there's a graphic nature, and I know that my middle schoolers would probably laugh and spend 5 minutes before we talked about this, giggling about it. And setting the tone, but I think it is really an important, powerful image. And I would also then go on to tell them that this image was placed in Copenhagen's harbor next to their Little Mermaid statue, which gets over 1 million visitors a year. And so they placed it there so that it would also be seen by the people who came to visit this place. So that it was really important for Copenhagen to have this statue acknowledged by as many people as possible. Would anybody else want to just speak to how this might be used?
It reminds me of just something someone recently said about performative allyship, that people can say that they're willing to do anything and to not acknowledge how hard it is to give up power and comfort. I'm sorry, that may not answer your question. It's just adding to what I'm seeing and what I'm reading. And just, you could talk to your students about why is it so challenging to say, you know, easy to say you will do something. How is it so hard to actually do something?
Absolutely.
You could connect to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. The next image that I've added is the global poverty ranking from the World Data Lab. And I'll give you a minute to just review that graph and ask you, going back to that framework, what do you notice? What does this tell you? And so it's predictive. It gives us data from 2018 and then predictive of 2030.
Is there a way you could make the graph a little larger?
Sure.
Sorry.
No, I'm going to stop sharing and try to blow it up a little bit.
Sorry.
Nope, I understand.
Speaking of aged eyes and squinting.
I'm going to adjust a few things and then reshare.
Thanks.
No problem. Oh, sorry, hold on, just. Okay, let's see if that is any. Oh, I don't know if that's any better for you. Is it any better?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. Any overall noticings?
Indonesia is not on the second part. Is that something someone else was noting? Is that the only one that's missing?
And India.
Yep.
I believe. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So it becomes more centered around Africa by 2030. So those countries are more specifically African. Although we have Venezuela, and we have, no, I think they're all Moody. I think they're all 9 of them. They become more centered on Africa. So I think that is something I might ask my students to think about and consider. And then what action, thinking about that framework again, what action does this promote? And what would inaction mean? So we see from 2018 to 2030, what would action look like? What would inaction mean? And then I would move on to that accountability phase, which this next image, and I'm sorry if it's a little small too, but I would ask students to then read this image and ask them to, in that accountability phrase, are there opportunities to raise even greater awareness to this issue, and what would it look like? And what do they notice in this last image, and how is it connected to the other images, and what do they all have in common? So I know I've thrown out a lot of questions, but thinking about how this text set works together and thinking about action and accountability, what are your thoughts about that?
So one thing I'm noticing is that above the sub-Saharan, we're seeing greater cities, you know, along the coast and stuff, and even in the southern Africa, where it's more white colonized regions, that's where we're seeing a lot of the wealth, and not in the sub-Saharan Africa, where majority of that population is not of white-bodied people or fairer complexion, as you would see like in Egypt.
And so that gives us this great opportunity to ask our students why, and to also ask our students, okay, well, so we see that this is happening. We see that despite all efforts and the world's becoming, that the world wealth is growing, that the poverty rate in Africa continues to increase. And so how can we be accountable to that wherever we are in the world? What actions and steps do we need to take to bring awareness to this issue? And that's all within that Dr. Barbara Love's framework. I'm gonna move on to the next text set because as I predicted, I am running out of time. And I'll start with this. One of the things that I love to do in a classroom is to really challenge what texts are for students. And so I love to bring dance into the class as a form of text. So I'll share this minute clip with you, and we'll use now Goldie Muhammad's framework to talk through this. All right, is that dance familiar to anyone? It is an Aboriginal dance from New Zealand, and their soccer team, men and women's soccer team, usually do it after a victory. And so it is pretty, and it has the dance, I think they did it recently, some students did it recently in New Zealand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter protests. So it is a warrior dance. And so thinking about that as a text and using Gholdy Muhammad's framework of identity, skill, intellect, critical thinking, and joy, we'll analyze this next set of texts. Let me move on. Oops, sorry. Come on, move with me. So we have that piece, and I'm not gonna go through these one by one. I'm gonna show the whole set of texts so that we can have a larger conversation. So I've also included in this text set a poem by Thomas King, and it's the poem, "I'm Not the Indian That You Had in Mind," and a tweet with a video from the United Nations. So I'm gonna take a minute just to read the poem, and it's an excerpt of the poem. It is not the whole poem, but I do wanna take a moment just to highlight these words. "I am not the Indian you had in mind. I've seen him. I've seen him ride, rush of wind, darkening tide, with wolf and eagle by his side. His buttocks firm and well-defined. My God, he looks so good from behind. But I'm not the Indian you had in mind. I'm not the Indian you had in mind. I've heard him roar, the warrior wild in the video store, the movies that we all adore, the cliches that we cannot rewind. But I'm not the Indian you had in mind. I'm not the Indian you had in mind. I've known him, I've known him well. The bare greased hair, the pungent smell, the piercing eye, the startling yell. Thank God he's the friendly kind, but I'm not the Indian you had in mind. I'm that other Indian, the one who lives down the street, the one you're disinclined to meet. The Oka guy, remember me? Hyperwash, wounded knee. That other one, the one who runs the local bar, the CEO, the movie star. The elder with his bingo tales, the activist alone in jail. The other Indian, the doctor, the homeless bum. The boys who sing around the drum. The relative I cannot bear, the father who was never there. He must have hated me, I guess, my best friend's kid with FAS. The single mom who drives the bus. I'm all of these, and they are us." So that poem, along with, and I'm gonna show you this quick clip from Twitter. I love also using Twitter. Some of the, I think it's just really accessible, quick graphics for students that are highly engaging, that they really do enjoy, I think. I might also start talking to my students about the relationship between image and word. So has the producer of this piece done a good job of comparing what they actually see in the image, the words that are there? Is there a discrepancy between the two? What do you think is the proposed outcome? And what perspective then is missing? That's probably one of my favorite questions for students. What do we see and what is missing from what's there? On the topic, get a sense of those images. And so thinking about that, this particular text, I might ask students, and I won't ask us to do it as a group, but I'll just take us through the thought process of using that the historical response literacy framework to guide our anti-racist investigation of all of these texts. So asking students to make connections to self using any of the pieces in this text set, and then understanding that it's important in any anti-racist pedagogy to first identify similarities as a method of humanization. Because when we can find similarities, then it's harder then to separate ourselves, right? It's harder to other people or to treat people differently when we've first established those similarities. And then looking at the skill. So what is the medium, or what is the mode of discourse, and what is the message? So I look at that mode of discourse, or that medium as dance. And so what's the message of that dance? What is the message of this poem? What is the message of this particular tweet? And then following up with students and asking them, how do you know that? So backing it up with evidence, but getting them to truly think about, okay, who crafted this? And do I have to think, what do I have to understand about who crafted this? Was it, so I can look at that dance and say that those are Indigenous people doing their Indigenous dancing. Do I have to question who Thomas King is? Do I have to question the intentions of the United Nations? And how does that power and privilege play into it? And what do I think is behind, what do students think is behind this image? And then for that intellect, I think that it's a great time to also then get students to ask questions and take an inquiry stance, and think about what questions do you have about Indigenous people after viewing this text set. Let's stop and take some time to do some research. Then that criticality, thinking about in what ways have Indigenous people persevered against systems of oppression. Where can we find that in these texts? Can we find them in these texts? Why can't we find them in these texts? Who's responsible for that? How do Indigenous people's strong sense of identity add to their power? Again, taking it out of that deficit mindset too, which is really important when we're talking about anti-racist pedagogy. We're not always assuming that people lack power. We're also talking about them in terms of the power that they have and how they utilize that power. And then that last part, my favorite part, that idea of the joy. And this can be done in numerous ways. We could go back to that dance and talk about the generations that have carried on that tradition and kept the culture alive. Or I could tell students we're going to do a 5-minute find where we do a quick celebratory investigation of Indigenous people today and in the past. And I think it's really important to focus on present day. Often we look at the past of marginalized people. I think about that as a Black American, how we often look to Martin Luther King, but then we avoid talking about people of present day, and how important it is for students to see and understand that activism is here and now as well, and celebratory examples are also in the present. Does anybody have any questions or suggestions or things that they would add from this text set overall?
I love that what the tweet brings into it is it brings the institutions into it, like economic, social, cultural, also talks about climate change. So when I think about Mohammed's framework of intellect and criticality kind of together, students could then think about, okay, well, what is my orientation to the earth and climate change? That's also identity. That's also building intellect. And then students could take on a project of some kind to make a change in their own life or community. And so I think that I think that you get more out of it with the text set, because you do that identity work with all three of the texts, and then that tweet just brings the institutional part of it out. Absolutely. I love layering text. I feel like students get so much more out of it when you layer text. Anyone else?
One thing I liked was Jason Momoa recently with the Aquaman premiere did one of their cultural dances with the cast, is that by not steering towards something that might interest the students more because of who he is, but it distracts from the message, is keeping to more prime source information, you really allow the students to funnel into what the focus and purpose of all the media and text is. So
I think that's such a great point, because even as I was looking for the dance, I shied away from using the soccer players. I shied away from using them, and I wanted Indigenous people to represent, and I wanted the dance to be done by all Indigenous people to represent, for them to represent themselves. So I think that's an important point to make. Oh, the election was just called. Okay.
Do we know by who?
Well, I just pulled up the Associated Press.
It's Biden.
It's Biden, 284 to 214, the Associated Press, applet. I know, can we all please dance and then
Yeah.
cry? And then cry for how close it was. Like cry about that it was so close. It should not have been.
It's so close, yes.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania called it, but they're still waiting for Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Alaska. So that number can go even higher.
Right.
Wow.
Wow.
It's a great day, y'all.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that I'm bringing politics into the discussion.
No.
But I'm sorry I put it in there. I was just like, I have to leave really quick to go scream off camera. So
Guys, it's a beautiful thing. I will say that.
Yeah.
That's why my camera was off because I was checking the results. So I apologize.
I want to just, I hate, I'm going to be conference moderator now. So 2 reasons why we plan this conference for these days is both Devere and I predicted that this election, we didn't think we would know till Monday. So we thought, what a great way for teachers to distract themselves. Let's do some really good learning because you can't watch the talking heads all day.
I know.
You know, that was actually part of our thoughts. I didn't try to advertise it too much that way, except for beginning Tuesday. But we also wanted to bring, the reason we have this stream with the anti-racism literacy teaching is because we really think it's important to get different cultures and people together to talk. And we have not had as much success with our breakout rooms, which were supposed to be the informal conversations between sessions that you have at a regular conference where you get to talk to different people. So today we're trying something new. Whatever link you clicked, whichever registration you went to, everyone's going into the same room. So we have decided we're going to try this again next year. Again, trying to do it for free or next to nothing. We've got a couple more institutions looking to help us with grant money and things like that. So if I can invite you all to help continue the conversation and to go to the breakout room so that we can all build bridges across cultures, because that I truly believe we can't do any of these frameworks that Keisha so nicely presented without an understanding and listening to how things work across the globe.
Perfect.
Thanks.
I'll end by
I'm
just
going to log out and go in there now.
Okay, I'll end by just saying that on the screen also there's some questions. We've talked about questions to ask students, but there are also some questions that we should be asking ourselves. And those questions are, what text work in concert around the topic or theme that I need to read for my own understanding, not just my students' understanding? What knowledge do I need to gain? Are there missing voices that I can bring in that would or that I need or could bring in to accommodate student understanding? Or what are the entry points of students considering their backgrounds and identities? What words and terms do students need to know and explore? And what community experts? This is really important because I think that what stops us is that fear that we don't know enough. And when we connect with community experts and partner with organizations, then they can lessen our load and bring in that ability to have conversations around things that promote humanization and varied perspectives. And then also this idea of real world advocacy. And I think teachers get intimidated and want to make it a big thing. It could be as small as just partnering with a local library and getting a book display together. So maybe I ask my students to work with their local library and put together a display, help them curate a display on Indigenous cultures and what that means. And so it doesn't have to be this huge thing. And then again, just the types of visual text sets. I love going to Twitter. I love going to National Geographic. I love using spoken word and dance. And even quick virtual museums visits are awesome for visual literacy. And so that's it, guys. Thank you, guys. And I'll stop sharing. And if we stick around for any questions that you have, although I know you're going to another big group session.
Yeah, that's one thing I found in my student placement is that anytime you have to talk about a topic like Christopher Columbus, is that my most of the host teachers I've had is said, you know, this is what the curriculum says, this is one perspective, but here's another, and supplies. So it doesn't have to be a huge like, oh, I got to re-scrap everything, is that you could throw in a media piece. You can throw in an additional book just to support both sides. So you have that debate for the children to critically think about things, is that a lot of them, they include it without making a huge curriculum change that is just thoughtful and meaningful ways of injecting the anti-racist, anti-biased thinking. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for just engaging with me. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to talk in such a small group and be open. And I hope that we can change the world through students, because I believe that they can and will, and we can and will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry I came in late, but this was lovely.
Thank you.
And memorable, historic.
All right. All right.
Hey, do you have to go, Keisha? Can I just ask?
No.
I'm an old person who doesn't. So I have a Twitter account. Do students use Twitter? Like 8th grade students and college students, you all use Twitter? Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how to start. I mean, I have a Twitter account. Is it following certain people that will get you good graphics and images? So yeah, maybe Googling where to follow, who to follow. I'm just trying to, yeah.
I'm going to go back to this because I think, and there's a handout in the session too, where this should be. So I have a handout with some stuff in it that mirrors the presentation, but following New York Times graphics, AP graphics, the Post graphics, Reuters graphics, following the UN, they make a lot of those kind of short videos that are digestible for students. And Instagram is huge. I know probably more students are on Instagram.
Sure. Making their own content.
Exactly. And I haven't gone into the world of TikTok, what's the clock or whatever yet, but I probably need to get on there too, because I'm so scared as soon as we get on, they'll migrate off.
Right. We old people, if we show up, then it's like not young anymore, I guess. I don't know.
Where did you say that? Oh, so sorry to cut you off, Kim.
No, good, go.
Where did you say the handout was for this session?
I think they told me that it would be loaded to the session itself, that it would be a handout downloaded there. I can double check to make sure that it is there.
Fine, because I really enjoyed the session and would love to be able to review and like be able to bring it to my 3rd grade love bugs.
As a geographer, I also see you cited the National Geographic Society, so that's good too.
Yes.
Good. Awesome.
So the real question is, are you following all these groups that you think we should also follow?
I am.
So if we follow you, we can just see who you're following. Follow.
That's
more
true.
Efficient method.
That is true. And you might want to ignore a little of what I've been tweeting lately, because I've been over the edge with election stuff. So I've been a little crazy. But here I am on Twitter, and I do follow all of these, and also LinkedIn as well.
And are you also on Instagram by any chance?
I am not on Insta. You know what? I think I made a separate account, because I was like posting, just personal pictures, and then I thought I better I think I do have a web series, and I know I'm there under my web series. It's not a lot, but it is American Miseducation on Instagram. So for my web series, I just talk about all the things we need to unlearn.
Mm-hmm. Neat. Cool.
Well, thank you so much. I was not able to find the handout, but
I will double check then. Let me send an email and double check to make sure that they put it up.
But I did know this session is recorded, so I will most likely be able to go back and watch. So that would be sufficient. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much. Great
talking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.